Return of the Exiled, or Why Must I Be the Hero? By T.J. Stegaheis. Read by YOB. Dedicated to Kurt Reimert, whose stories inspired this work. Requiescat in pace. Chapter 11. Cilio and Filio. A Journey Through Stone and Ice. So from Pan we set out for Luffa and this Prince Frederick, who apparently was going to be King of Tor once we got those papers to him. Things had gotten so much better after Smoke sold those documents to the magistrate in Pan. Sard had insisted that we get some real food to bring along. That was a great idea. Tell them about the weather. Hush, I'm telling this. Well, at least introduce yourself. That's polite. Oh, I'm Cilio. This is my brother Filio. I'm telling this story because I'm the better storyteller. Or not. Hush. Anyway, we were traveling west, and the weather was very nice for the first couple of days. One of the soldiers had killed a deer, so we had plenty of food. We camped around a big fire, and someone had brought wineskins, so the first night was a lot of fun. Who brought the wine? Hey, I'm telling this story. Well, don't leave out the good stuff, like my wine they all drank. Okay, now be silent or go away. Anyway, Dobrina kept looking around like she expected to be attacked or something. She drank far too much wine and had to go lay down. You got her drunk, didn't you? Go away. After a bit, I went over to make sure she was all right. I mean, she looked a little pale. Are you angry with us or something? I asked her. I'm afraid I had too much wine, she said. I'll be fine by the morning, thank you. You look like something here is bothering you. Are you sure that you'll be all right? I asked. There are just so many men here. No, I don't understand why they're so close. Something, she stuttered. Yep, she had too much wine. I guess I'm just nervous about the mountains, she said. You have never been in the mountains before? I asked. I think I'd better sleep now, she said, and was instantly asleep. You got her drunk. Shut your mouth. I figured that she had told me more than she meant to, so I decided to keep it to myself, especially about your being drunk on my wine. That was not my fault. Was too. Was not. Was too. Ahem. Anyway, back to the fire. She was fine in the morning, and when I saw her. Wendy avoided the wine and ate venison and dried apples with us. Hey, I didn't get any apples. You bought wine instead. I shared my wine. Why didn't any of you share your apples? You didn't ask. Prickle nuts. So shortly after leaving Pan, we ran into Tanner and his friends. That was when Dobrina suggested that we go to Luffa together. Somehow we wound up offering to accompany them to a mountain up north as part of our journey to Luffa. A few weeks out of the way, but I guess that's how these journeys turn out. So we began our journey to the distant mountains. Now we numbered 27, and Sard said that we could just camp openly, as few would think to attack us. The next morning we traveled on, using northbound roads and a map that Sard had. He was the leader of the group. They know that. Well, why don't you? How do you know that they know if you don't tell them so they know? We had good traveling for the first week or so. Then no rain, warm nights, and only one little bunch of zombies. It was good. Then it rained for 2 days, and we had to slow down. The landscape was getting more and more hilly and rocky, with many sharp stones sticking up out of the ground, some of them taller than Riff. Sard had us gnomes scout ahead for the best routes, as his map was a little sketchy in this area. It was a good thing that we were traveling in the springtime, as some of this land must be impassable to travel in the winter. The big rocks made us nervous, as undead of all kinds could use them to hide. We did find one zombie up there, but he had been pinned by a fallen rock and could not escape. We usually found rock overhangs to camp under. The patchy rain that fell during the second week was not heavy, and Sard had us keep going until we were in sight of the mountain that Pock the soldier had told us about. That afternoon it was overcast and damp, but it did not rain on us. Sard stood on a high point of ground and tried to get his map set to the same angle as the land he was looking at, so he might hope to find the hidden way referred to in the clue. It was no use, the map just didn't cover this area with any details. "We are supposed to see the secret Mountain King through the horns on that mountain," he said to no one in particular. "I just don't see it. Maybe this is the wrong mountain." "What about that rise over there?" said Tern, another soldier. "That might be better indeed," said Sard. "Wait here a moment." He walked over to the small hill and surveyed it for some minutes before going to the other side. Minutes later he reappeared on the summit of the hill. He spent some time looking carefully at the mountain, which was still about a mile off, before coming down and rejoining us. "That's it, all right," he said. "You get a perfect view of the peak like a crown framed between those two peaks. But I still don't see how the way in the mountains at front. If we have to climb those mountains and get there, we will have to be here far longer than our supplies will hold out." "It says secret way. That cannot mean climbing," said Tanner. "But what if this secret way has disappeared, caved in or something?" said Sard. "We can go to the foot of it and at least see what can be found," said Tanner. So we traveled the remaining distance to where the mountainside rose sharply out of the hills. And it was getting dark, I know, and cold. Will you shush? At first we saw nothing, just as Sard had feared. Then we were approached by a strange dwarf and challenged. "What are you people doing here?" he inquired sharply. "This is mining country. You could be killed." "If you please, good dwarf," said Sard politely, as the dwarf held a loaded crossbow, "we are following clues to an inheritance this man was left, and the clues his ancestor left led us here. We mean no harm." "Ancestor, eh?" inquired the dwarf, his eyes narrowing. "From Payton?" Yes, said Tanner. "Do you know of the can and his symbol?" "Maybe," returned the dwarf. "Do you have the clues with you?" Tanner showed him the ancient parchment and the clues written on it. The dwarf uncovered a lantern to read it by. "Through Demon's Horns you'll see his crown, the secret Mountain King. By hidden way you'll take your path, but do not touch a thing. Between forked beard you'll find his mouth, or tongue and lips and teeth. Upon the ice a coffin lid. Can you read what lies beneath?" "I'm satisfied it's you," said the dwarf. "I'll lead you and 3 others past through the mine as to get to the Mountain King. But if you touch anything in our mine, I'll kill all of you." He raised his crossbow to emphasize his point. He seemed very hostile, even for a dwarf. I think he was bluffing. I noticed that you didn't say anything at the time. Tanner agreed and chose Bud, Riff, and Frog to go with him. Frog was a big farm boy whom Sard had brought from the dungeon with him. Since Groton was a blue forged dwarf, and this fellow was a gray forged dwarf, Groton just stayed out of sight. Something about an old feud. I had the story from Frog. We started the following morning. The mine entrance was well concealed and looked like a solid stone. The mine was dark, but not very exciting, except for the dwarves, who followed us suspiciously. The journey was long, and the dwarves made certain that we stayed on course. In several places we had to climb stairs. Then we emerged in a little hanging valley across which we could see the Mountain King. Looking it over, we could see that this side of the mountain was covered in ice floes and rocks, which made many fantastic shapes, including what looked like an enormous face, bearded and hawk-nosed. It was very cold at this altitude. When we moved off to the west a few yards, the fork in the beard could be seen. When we approached the beard, we could see an icy stream flowing between the forks to fall at the end of the valley. But at the mouth was an ice shelf that indeed looked like a tongue. Traveling with great care, we reached the cave mouth and then onto the tongue. To either side were granite teeth, although these looked like they had been added by clever hands. The cave led to an underground ice lake, very dangerous. We had to be cautious. Light filtered down from an opening above, showing many cascades of ice over the walls. Water dripped from the melting snow above us. Riff's torch reflected off the ice, lighting up a wide area. Up a series of icy stone steps, we found the great coffin lid of granite poking up from the ice. Perhaps a giant or great ogre. It took quite a bit of work to chip and loosen the lid, and all of us to lift it off. Not seeing the symbol, Tanner was afraid that we may have made the trip in vain, when Bud suggested that beneath may mean the underside of the lid. At first the lid slid aside at our every attempt to turn it over, but finally we braced it against a stone and got it up on its side. Bud, Riff, and I held the lid up, while Tanner looked at the underside. There, fitted into the underside, was the symbol, and carved into the stone was another clue to follow. To Goblin Swamp I lead you now. Take Western Road by horse. Find the high fork exalted so, and northward set your course. To Heason's face your path will run, and thence through right-hand sliver, down twilight path and hidden cave, across the sudden river. In dark composed, with eyes kept closed, put your fate in friendly hands. To unknown vale, down leftward trail, my pointy casket stands. This is the longest clue yet, said Tanner. We must be going far for this one. Worse luck, I heard Bud say. We're going into goblin country. I hate goblins. I hate goblins too. You be silent. So, with the symbol safely in Tanner's pack and the clue written on a piece of parchment, we headed back to where the rest of the group waited to hear what we had found. Filio and I had been helping Tanner with his attempt to record our journey. He was so impatient that he threw out our work and struggled on by his own efforts. We were talking to Tanner's friends Stobart and Terrell, who spoke of nobles as all being greedy and robbing the common folks. I hope that they are mistaken. Sard found another dwarf who traded some dried fish for the remainder of our venison. Then we saw Tanner and the men returning. Sard was less than pleased to hear that we were going to next be heading into Goblin Lands, but at least we were now heading in the right direction to get to Luffa. Packing up our camp, we bid the crossbow-carrying dwarf goodbye. He was so much friendlier when we were leaving. If you find that he shouted, "So long and don't come back," friendly, I liked it. You like rock rubs. I do not do too. I'll remember that. I doubt it. What? As it turned out, we would be taking a lot longer to get to the swamp than anyone could have known, but I am getting ahead of myself. As we were crossing a river back into the high meadowlands, we came upon three grolls who had something cornered in a hollow log. They would prod it with a long stick, and shrill cries would come from the interior. Sard was going to avoid them until a voice came from inside the log and said clearly, "No, grolls not hurt Midgie, not hurt Midgie, go away." This was followed by more cries and sobs. I know what that is. Sard thought it was a child. He and Bud and Riff killed the grolls before they had even thought about it. Imagine their surprise when, instead of a human child, a fluffy, fully white creature about 3 feet high crawled out the log. "Thank you, I do," it said. "Midgie thank men for saving Midgie. Midgie help men?" Sard had no idea what he was to think. Bud offered the child some bread and dried apple he had. Riff petted Midgie's head gingerly. Filio and I know about fuzzles. We are not supposed to tell men about them, but even in this event, what could we do? Windy was charmed by Midgie. Sard was not so much charmed as concerned, but he knew he could not leave her here with the grolls around. Midgie said that her family was gone, so now the group included one fuzzle. Cover all your buckles, men. Wait until she starts playing with your equipment. We kept her as busy as best we could, for about a dozen heartbeats, maybe. We were headed south with the intention of meeting up with the north border road and following it west to the river and crossing into Goblin Country. Yuck! Just as we were nicely clear of the rocky hills of the north, we encountered a group of refugees from Gorville City in Thanet. From these people, we learned that a vampire had slain their lord and was using the city to launch an undead empire. According to the people we spoke with, the creature had already claimed almost the entire population of Gorville City, and his zombie and shadow warriors were spreading his influence into the surrounding countryside. What could we do? The symbols of Pagan Khan were supposed to be used to battle undead. We were this land's best hope. The capital of Thanet was just a few miles to the west, and I had an idea. We had an idea. You had nothing. I knew where the Gnomish Sanctuary was hidden. All gnomes know where that is. Oh, yeah? Yes, now please be quiet. I told Sard that we could get a gnomish army if we had something to make it worth their while. He, of course, asked me what we had to offer so many gnomes. Gorval City, I said. I am not the lord of Gorval City, said Sard. How am I to promise them something I do not have? If we speak to King Mathrin, I'm sure that he will see the benefit of giving us a city to ensure the security of his kingdom and inherit a city full of productive citizens as well, I told him. He did not understand what I meant, but we set out for Ventura, the capital of Thanet. King Mathrin was once a great leader of a mighty nation, but when we arrived, the king and his nation were suffering the ravages of time and the many goblin attacks. As happens with some kings, King Mathrin's strength was tied to that of his nation. The nation bowmen, once renowned throughout the many lands, were being sent to the swamp edge instead of guarding the highways and borders. With the ebbing fortunes of the kingdom, the lowly spearmen and slingers had sought employment in other kingdoms where they could expect better pay. This left the bowmen vulnerable at close range. Knights and swordsmen were in short supply due to the waning fortunes of the noble classes. As a result, bandits and highwaymen were robbing the kingdom and bleeding it out. The king was a gaunt physical reflection of this blight. He was now a stooped and frail, nervous man, given to rubbing his hands and looking about as if he feared invisible enemies in every corner, yet still too proud to ask Bokenshare for aid. Poor old king, they even robbed him of his sleep. Sard must have felt that there was something in my thoughts worth risking the king's wrath, because he put me before the king. I don't know how he convinced him to hear me, but there I was. I braced myself up and bowed low to this king that I had very much hoped would be the answer to gnomish prayers. When he bade me rise, I explained as best I could the situation in Gorval City, as the refugees had explained them to us. I gave him no time to express grief or worry on this point, as I know he might break down and refuse any idea other than fortifying all the nation towns against the vampire. I launched immediately into a plan to gather all the gnomes hiding in the northern hills, and with the promise of a city that they could call their own, and a king who would not betray them, attack and defeat the vampire before he built his power to the point that none might stop him. In exchange, we gnomes would crown a king of the gnomes, not to defy the king of Thanet, but to unify the gnomish people and bring back the time when they worked and fought beside humans. The city would be a gathering place and the seat of gnomish government, in fealty to King Mathrin. The gnomes would join forces with the armies of Thanet and fill in the role that the slingers and spearmen used to perform. With the nation bowmen to cover attacks at medium and long range, and gnomish hammer, spear, and javelin fighters to keep the bowmen from falling to goblin swords and clubs, the armies of the king would again command respect in Thanet. I was out of breath, but it sounded good to me. I waited to see what his highness thought. The king sat for quite a while, his hands nervously rubbing themselves. "We see the potential you speak of," said the king. "If the gnomes are as good at warfare as you seem to think they are, this would indeed be our salvation, and Thanet could rise again, even as the gnomes rise again. We will make you this bargain. If the gnomish armies you raise can reclaim Gorval City with not one undead threat coming out to the rest of Thanet because of your campaign, we will sit in council with you and your king to work out the very agreement you have suggested. Your king will have to accept that the fealty of Gorval City still belongs to us, but we and he will treat with one another as royals, and we pledge our honor and support to the gnomish people in mutual allegiance. Do you accept?" "This I do accept on behalf of the gnomish people everywhere, your highness. I give you our heartfelt thanks and my promise that you will not be displeased," I said. What else could I have said? The gnomish plan was better than the king had responded to my plan better than I expected. So we set off for the northern hills in total violation of gnomish custom, as we were bringing humans right to the doorstep of our last remaining free city. If I got this wrong, I would be a very dead gnome. You show off. Am I wrong? It would not be quite that dramatic, although we would never be able to show our faces again. Ha, I know those old gnomes. We would not have any faces to show. I still think that you're being overdramatic. So you say. Author's note. To save paper, never let gnomes tell their own stories. Use a troll. A troll? Is he kidding? Oh, hush up.